So welcome back, week three of this course. And tonight what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a little bit more on self-metta. I'm going to introduce a couple of approaches to self-metta, and we're going to do a little bit of meditation. Then we'll have our breakout groups as normal and a break. And later this evening, we're going to look at the difficult person stage, so the fourth stage, and just explore what that's about, what's happening there, and what we're trying to do in that stage, how we're trying to practice in that particularly difficult stage. And then we'll do actually a full 5-stage Metta Bhavana, and we'll finish by setting up our home practice for this week. Now, it's just come to my attention in the last 10 or 50 minutes that the email, I don't think I managed to send the email out correctly last week. So I'm thinking that probably most of you didn't get it. So I'm really, really sorry about that. I just got it wrong. So I'll send the video out for last week's class tomorrow, as well as the video for this week's class. So really sorry about that again. So tonight I'll just get stuck into it. I've been talking over the last, let me just share my screen here, give me a moment. So I've been talking over the last few weeks about how we've got these two strands of experience, these two ways of understanding what's happening at any given point in time. So we've got what is there, all the different things that are arising in our experience through the senses and through the mind. And then there's what we do with that, how we respond to that. So if we look at it in this way, it kind of gives us a little bit of an insight into what it is that we're trying to do with Metta Bhavana and actually with Buddhist practice more generally. So part of what we're trying to do part of what we're doing is we're interpreting. So interpretation is part of what we do. I mentioned this last week, but I just wanted to revisit it. So it's as if what we're doing all the time, and this is going on consciously and unconsciously, probably mostly unconsciously, is that we're putting all of the experience that we have into a kind of framework. We're trying to make sense of the world and put it into a kind of framework of understanding and of perspective. And then when we experience something new, we put it into that framework. We kind of slot it into a pre-existing framework. So it's both it's partly something that's already there based on the fact we've done that before. And it's partly something that we're continuing to regenerate or recreate moment by moment. So that I don't want to get into technicalities, but if you're interested, the Sanskrit word for this process is samnya, which is sometimes called perception or apperception, which is this function that's going on all the time of putting all of our experience into some kind of a bigger picture. So we can't help doing this, but what we can do is, if we bring awareness to it, we can do it in a way which is more skillful and is more appropriate to the reality of the situation. So often this kind of interpretation happens in a way that creates this kind of reality which doesn't correspond to what's really happening. So part of what we're trying to do with Metta Bhavana and with Buddhist practice more generally is do that, create those interpretations in such a way that it's more appropriate or more accurate to the reality of the situation. So as I mentioned last week, one of the ways that we interpret badness in the world, when we experience something which is wrong or which shouldn't happen, we try and find some way of understanding that. And very often what we do is there's an element of self-condemnation that comes into that. So we ascribe that badness or that pain or that misfortune to something bad about ourselves. There's some kind of, maybe we even have a sense that there's some kind of inherent badness about who and what we are. And this is part of the reason I think that we can get into difficulties with the first stage, because just encountering ourselves, we encounter that sense of badness. Yeah. So another word for this is self-hatred. Yeah. But there's something about self-condemnation, which I think is quite useful to think of it in that kind of way. And what's particularly insidious about this is that we have the idea that it's okay. So probably most of us have a fairly well-developed sense that hating other people is problematic, even wrong. Yeah. So probably most of us feel that. Maybe all of us feel that hating other people is a bad thing. If we didn't have that sense or that conviction, we probably wouldn't be bothering to do the Metta Bhavana. So I'm kind of assuming that we all have that sense that hating other people is not a good thing and is problematic, and even maybe deeply problematic. But we can, however, feel that hating ourselves is okay. And that requires a little bit of reflection. So how is that okay, or why is that okay? Because actually, from a Buddhist perspective, it's not okay to hate anybody, including ourselves. So yeah, this is something that like I say, we need to bring a bit of awareness to, and almost to really evaluate that, to really question that. Why is it that I speak to myself in a way that I would never speak to another person, for example? Why would I speak to myself in a way that I would never speak to another person? We might even think that it's a good thing to have a self-condemning attitude. I've heard people say that. I think even I've had that attitude myself, unconsciously. And again, I think this is one of the things that's really tricky, is that often these attitudes that we have are unconscious. Yeah, we don't know that we're doing them, but they inform and they even define and shape the way that we think about the world, and therefore the way that we live in the world. So that there's, in a way, I think, particularly with this one, with the self-condemnation attitude or perspective or habit, there's an additional trap, and that is that we notice this tendency. We might, particularly when we begin to develop awareness of our mind, we start noticing this, and then we feel bad about feeling bad about ourselves. It's really annoying and quite tricky, because you think, oh no, I shouldn't be doing that, and then you feel bad about doing something which you shouldn't be doing. It can get quite cyclical, and some of you will probably recognize what I'm talking about. If you don't, that's wonderful. I rejoice in the fact. I really wish that none of you had a clue what I was talking about and it was completely alien to your experience, but I suspect, based on experience, that probably some of this will be resonating with at least some of you. So what I want to do now is just offer two perspectives or two approaches to self-metta, which might help to kind of interrupt that habit of self-condemnation, or at least provide an entry into the practice that circumvents that particular habit. So the first one is to look at the idea of potential. So we all have potential. This is, in a way, a kind of a starting point for Buddhism. Buddhism starts from this idea and this fact even that human beings have the potential to grow and develop. So the Buddha was able to actualize that potential and grow into a Buddha, in the same way that a plant produces a flower and then a fruit. So he was able to actualize that. And what he saw, this is the way Buddhist texts talk about it, he saw that all human beings had the capacity to develop in the way that he developed. We all have those kind of qualities of awareness, of kindness, of generosity, of wisdom. We've all got them kind of lying latent or nascent within us. Like a seed that's lying in the ground, lying in the earth, that's just waiting for the conditions to germinate and to grow into a plant. So we're all like that. So we can reflect that that potential that we have is part of what we are now. So we might not have realized that potential, but we have that potential. We have that seed within us. Now, I'm talking in this way. The way I'm going to talk tonight about the self-metta is in a way talking a little bit more poetically. I think if you were to look at that in a strictly philosophical way, you'd probably you'd probably come unstuck. So I'm talking about something which is more poetic, I suppose you could say. The idea of a seed, the idea of potential is more of a poetic, but nevertheless, it does have a kind of reality to it. Yeah. So we have a like the traditional image that's given for this in the Buddhist tradition is of a lotus flower. So you can see the Buddha behind me is actually seated on a lotus, and the image of a lotus arises again and again in Buddhism, and it symbolizes all kinds of things. But one of the things it symbolizes, particularly in the Buddhist traditional scriptures, is of potential. Yeah, so we're like a flower bud that is lying beneath the water level, even maybe in the mud at the bottom of the pond, and we can grow, and that flower can break forth from the surface of the water and unfold into a perfect lotus. So you could say that self-metta is the kindly acknowledgement of what is actually present within the context of an awareness of your own potential. Yeah? So we kind of come to whatever is arising with a sense that there can be more, that we can grow from wherever we find ourselves. And that perspective can change profoundly the way we relate to what happens. And not only change the way we relate to ourselves, but also the way we relate to other people. So we're relating to other people as possessing the capacity to grow and develop. Not everyone's going to want to actualize that, but the fact that everyone possesses that makes a big difference in terms of the way that we relate to others. So yeah, so that's the first thing there is I'll just share that. So yeah, so the first approach to developing self-metta is that we recall that we, or you, possess potential. And then I've just got that quote there, which is self-metta is the kindly acknowledgement of what is actually present within the context of an awareness of your own potential. So the second approach is that that we can recall that we are intrinsically pure. So what do I mean by that? So again, this is it's akin to the previous approach in terms of looking at potential, but it's slightly different. And again, it's very much looking in terms of metaphor or myth or symbol. So there's certain strands of Buddhist thought and Buddhist teaching which communicate the fact that the mind in its own nature is pure. And whatever defilements come into it, and what I mean by defilement is like hatred or craving or confusion or dullness or anxiety, all of those things are adventitious, which means they come from outside. Yeah? So the mind itself, in its deepest nature, is pure. And these things, these defilements, these unskillful mental states, these hindrances, these afflictions, however you want to call them, they as it were come from outside. But at our deepest, we are pure. So you could say that this is a little bit like the idea of original purity, which is in direct contrast to the idea of original sin. And original sin is in a way an example of a way of thinking, a sort of philosophical perspective that condemns the self as being fundamentally flawed, fundamentally broken, fundamentally defiled, or, well, in a word, evil. So yeah, Buddhism doesn't think about the human mind in that kind of way. It thinks much more that, yeah, like I say, that there's this deeper layer of the mind which is pure, and that the defilements, as it were, come from outside, which means that if we remember that, it can help us again to have a perspective on the mind, which is much more liberating. So you can engage with that kind of idea. by just by thinking of that white light, or even a diamond in the heart. Yeah, there's a particular figure that some of you will be familiar with from the Vajrayana tradition. Vajrayana means diamond way, and Vajrasattva means diamond being. And he's this white young man. He's made of light. So that, again, we're talking in the realm of myth and symbol here, not in the realm of historical fact. And he holds a diamond, actually he holds it with his right hand. He holds a diamond thunderbolt to his heart, which is the embodiment of this kind of primordial or intrinsic purity. In his other hand, he holds a bell, a diamond bell. And again, he's seated on a white lotus. So white, of course, is the color that is associated with purity. I know not everyone gets along very well with the notion of purity. And if you don't, it's worth reflecting on why that is. It can have quite strong, unhelpful connotations for some people. But I think it's worth pointing out the importance of it, of this idea of purifying by recognizing that we've never been impure. So Vajrasattva, this white young man, beautiful young man, made of white light, seated on a white lotus, holding this diamond to his heart, and his heart glowing blue embodies this notion, embodies the deeper the deeper truth that the mind is fundamentally, intrinsically, and primordially pure. We can bring some of that to the Metta Bhavana practice. And so I just wanted to have a go at that now. So if you'd like to get into your meditation posture, and we'll just take one of those approaches. In this practice. I guess just give you a couple of minutes just to set yourselves up and make yourself comfortable. So beginning by just relaxing into the body, allowing yourself to arrive. And right from the outset, recognizing that we are in the process of unfolding. So in other words, there's more to come. We're not fully developed. We're not fully grown yet. There's more to come. There are all kinds of unrealized potentialities lying within us. So that's the overall context for what we experience. So what we experience includes a sense of place. So where are you? Where is your body located? Where is your sense experience happening? So your body resting on your chair or your cushions or the floor. Legs and feet, your buttocks, your pelvis. The breath flowing in and out of your abdomen and your chest, the whole of the torso. So again, the body is given to us at this particular point in time with all kinds of sensations, which most of which we can't change. What we can change or what we can have some influence over is how we respond to what's there. And part of that is just acknowledging the bare facts of our physical experience, the pleasantness of it or the painfulness of it, or the neither pleasant or painfulness of it. The arms and the hands, the head and the face. So as well as the senses, the eye, the ear, what we can hear, what we can smell and taste, and what we feel through our body, there's the mind. There's thought, emotion, and impulse. And much of that, much of the mind, is something that we're doing. It includes a response, an action of thought, emotion, and impulse. The mind is dynamic. And by introducing awareness into that, we can begin to think and emote and respond in a different kind of way, in a way that means that we develop the potential which we have. We develop our heart and we develop our mind. And this particularly comes out in the phrase, may I grow and develop. So if you wish, you could say that phrase to yourself, may I grow and develop. And it also, this perspective of growth and development and potential also brings a new sense to the phrase, may I be free from suffering. May I be free from suffering is saying that that is a real potential for us, that we have the potential to grow free from suffering, which is the state of the Buddha, the state of awakening. So we can say, may I be free from suffering. If things are naturally opening out, then you can just let them continue to open out and expand. And then I'd invite you to bring to mind a friend. And bringing your friend to mind as vividly as you can. Your friend too has this potential. They too are like a bud that can flower into full bloom. We can say as well to our friend, may you grow and develop. In other words, may you bring forth that potential which you already possess. may you be free from suffering. And then just sit. So let go of the effort to do this or that particular thing and just sit. I'm just going to finish by reading a short poem. Above me broods. Above me broods a world of mysteries and magnitudes. I see, I hear more than what strikes the eye or meets the ear. Within me sleep potencies deep, unfathomably deep, which, when awake, the bonds of life, death, time, and space will break. Infinity, above me like the blue sky do I see. Below, in me, lies the reflection of infinity. So just bringing the meditation to a conclusion. That poem, by the way, was from Sangharakshita. So that was basically approaching the Metta Bhavana by way of the approach of potential. You can experiment with the other approach some other time in your own way. So what we'll do is we'll break now into our groups. So I'll just read that question again. Hi, is there layers to the Metta Bhavana? Like you think it's going great and then you reach a point of resistance as you go deeper. So yes, I think that's absolutely true. That's what can happen. And I think it's true of meditation and Buddhism more generally, that you go along, you have a certain idea of what you're doing, and then you proceed on the basis of that idea. And then something happens where you realize that it's more profound than you realized, and you have to kind of change your approach. And often that can be something coming into your experience that you weren't expecting. So it's part of the reason why it's so important to keep connecting with other people who are practicing and keeping on going deeper, because if you don't, what will happen is your practice will just kind of run aground because it'll become stale. So we keep having to refresh our perspectives, our understanding of what we're trying to do, and refresh our intention to engage more and more deeply. It's what we, I mean, really that's what commitment means in the Buddhist context. We talk about, well, the traditional phrase is going for refuge. Going for refuge means to commit at ever and deeper levels to the process of transformation, the process of bringing that potential that we have more and more into fulfillment, actually, well, actualizing it, as it were. And so, yeah, it's quite common, for example, that you have a really deep meditation one day, and then the next day maybe it's all over the place. I find that typically that's what happens with me, that I have a really deep meditation, I get really concentrated, I touch on some deeper level of the mind, and then everything goes a bit haywire for a little while, when it's as if you're trying to kind of integrate that experience. You're trying to understand what happened at all different kinds of levels. Again, this is not all that happens at a conscious level. The mind is deep. I'm reminded of the image of the ocean, which is often given as an image for the mind. Oh, here are the questions, they're coming. Can you please say a bit more about the defilements coming from outside of us? So they don't literally come from outside of us. That's what adventitious means. It means that they're not intrinsic. So what it's basically saying is that this teaching is that the words are literally, this mind is luminous. That's what the Buddha says. This mind is luminous. Whatever defilements arise are adventitious. So it's like saying there's a layer of the mind, to use that kind of metaphor, which is untouched by what we say or what we do. It's just like at the very, very base level of the mind, it's pure, it's unstained, and nothing we can do can defile it. And according to one Buddhist tradition, you experience that when you die. So when you die, this luminosity, they say the ground luminosity arises, and most of us, because we're not familiar with it, we get frightened and we fall away from it. But part of what you're trying to do when you meditate is you're trying to familiarize yourselves. This is the Buddhist approach to meditation. You're trying to familiarize yourselves with all the different layers and depths of the mind, so that when you die, it's not unfamiliar to you. You know what's happening. You recognize what's happening because you've been there in meditation already, so it's not frightening to you. So if you have that kind of confidence where you can meet whatever arises without fear, obviously you're going to be a really confident person. And the Metta Bhavana will help us to do that. It'll help us to become much more fearless, because we're not frightened of our own. What we're frightened of often is the negative mental states that we get into, as much as we are of an external threat. That's in a way what an external threat is. It's just something that we perceive. Anyway, just getting a little bit philosophical maybe, but yeah, just to say that's kind of what that luminosity, what that really means is there's a kind of a layer or an aspect of mind which is always luminous, which can't be made dark, so to speak. And yeah, if we have that perspective, it changes the way that we relate to what happens. There's a question regarding these online retreats. Are there any guidelines for doing it from home? I'm not convinced I'll be half as invested from my home environment. Well, yeah, I mean, that's the big challenge, is to try and make your home environment as retreat-like as possible. If you can go away somewhere, I mean, I'm not sure if we'll probably not be able to do that. It'd be awkward at that time because of the restrictions that we're under. But yeah, it's doing things like, if you've got a television, putting it in the cupboard, turning your phone off. It's amazing, just turning the radio and the television and your phone off, how that will change the environment that you live in. Yeah, just letting people know that you're not going to be available. So I'm going to be on retreat. I'm going to be at home, but I'm going to be in retreat. So if you contact me, I'm not going to respond. Just letting people know that, putting an out of office on your email, just so you can not. So much of what being on retreat means is just not being in constant communication with a lot of people and having a lot of things going on. And you can actually replicate that being at home. It's harder because you are at home, and the different stimulations that are in your house will remind you of certain things. But so I guess what I'm saying is it's not quite the same as going away, but it's actually a lot of people have found that are friends of mine, and I've found this myself, that you can actually be on retreat much more than you think you might think you can be online. So yeah. When I bring someone to mind in meditation, I automatically go to mudita or compassion. Should I be trying to feel mudita for a difficult person instead of always connecting to kindness towards their suffering? Yeah, so mudita is sympathetic joy. So that's one approach. Is actually with a difficult person is not just connecting with the fact that they suffer, but connecting with the fact that they experience joy. Um, Again, a lot of what you're trying to do with Metta Bhavana is just kind of interrupt the mechanical, habitual um, mind that arises. Sometimes I think it's a little bit like putting a spanner in the works, so that sort of grinding into gear of aversion just can't happen. So that might be a really good way of approaching it. So okay, so I'm going to reflect in the fourth stage that this person experiences joy, not just the fact they experience suffering. Yeah. Any tips on being more receptive during the metta, at least forceful? I find I get very tense, especially in my body, and try to force it. I know you spoke about spaciousness last week, so I will try that. Yeah, I mean, hmm. Well, I suppose one way is just to keep in touch with your body and noticing when tension arises. And if it does, relax, try and just relax it again. Trying to relax is a difficult thing. Um, yeah, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, in a way, that is the question as to how to relax that habitual tendency we have to tense around things, to resist difficulty. That's really what's happening in the fourth stage. Is something painful's happening that we don't want, and we try and push it away. That's effectively so. Whatever helps us to feel the painful sensation but not react to it with tension is precisely what we're trying to do. So, in a sense, all of the things we're talking about are about that. What tradition does that belong to, the part of your mind that is there when you die? Well, I was talking basically from the Tibetan tradition. So there's a book that some of you might be familiar with called the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is kind of like a manual for helping you negotiate the after death state in a way that's going to lead to your liberation. It's sometimes, yeah, well, that's a whole other topic, but that's basically what I was thinking of. Is that particular tradition that's recorded and sort of explained in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. You can read it and it explains it. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Thank you for this explanation on the depths of the mind and meditation and death. Exactly what I needed to hear to help my 19-year-old daughter who is constantly worried about the afterlife. Well, it is a big question, for people. You know, Death is like, um, well, it's a reality, isn't it? It's a fact. We all know that we're going to end at some point, and what happens after that is a big question for a lot of people. Um, um, so we haven't really got time to get into that tonight, but I mean, maybe what I'll say is that traditionally, metta is like a really important force. I mean, that's the Tibetan Book of the Dead, for example. While it doesn't use the word metta, it talks constantly about the need and the importance of developing the intention to benefit others when you're in the after death state. And that's something that we can do if people have passed on. It's said to be really important to wish them well. That's the most important thing. I mean, which is it's put in a slightly more negative way, but we have that phrase. You mustn't speak ill of the dead, and that's according to the Buddhist tradition. I mean, that's because when people are after they've died, they're particularly sensitive to our mental states. So if we're no longer embodied, but we still exist in some way, we're really sensitive, which is the kind of sensitivity you develop if you meditate a lot. You start sensing things a little much more deeply and much more subtly. Anyway, hold on, we better move on, otherwise we're going to run out of time for what's next. So where are we? So yeah, I have been talking over these these past weeks about these two strands of experience. So we've got where are we now? So we've got what is there, and we've got what we do. Now, part of what is there. Oops, actually, that's wrong. That should say that feeling tone is actually part of what is there, not what we do. That's what happens when you do your slides at the last minute. Let me just change that. So part of what is there is what's called feeling tone. So this is not something that we're doing, it's something that arises and it's always present. And that can be of three kinds. So feeling tone can be, I've put Vedana in the slide there. Vedana is the Sanskrit and Pali, the kind of traditional Buddhist words for this aspect of experience. And Vedana can be of three kinds. So it can be pleasant, painful, or neutral. So every single experience that we have, everything we taste, everything we hear, everything we see, every person that we encounter, and this is particularly key for the Metta Bhavana, produces Vedana, or another way of putting it is Vedana arises independence upon us coming in contact with something. And it's kind of, it just happens. It's not something we can do anything about. So if we encounter somebody and they insult us, we will experience that as painful. We probably won't be able to do much about that. If they strike us, if they hit us, we'll experience that as painful. So that's not something we can do something about. What we're looking at with the Metta Bhavana is, in a way, what we do in response to the Vedana that we experience, the feeling tone that we experience. So this becomes particularly important in the second, third, and fourth stages. Sorry, my slides are just a mess tonight. Just forget about them. So you've got feeling tone, which is pleasant or painful. So something you encounter somebody that you like, you encounter them as pleasant. So that's usually what happens in the friend stage. You encounter somebody that is painful, that you don't like, and that's usually what we do. We usually work with that in the difficult person stage. And then the neutral person stage, neutral Vedana, or neutral feeling tone, is another way of saying we're not that pushed either way. We're indifferent. We're bored even. We don't mind if they're there or not there. We're not that bothered. So in the different stages, in the friend stage and the neutral person stage and the difficult person stage, we're working with those different kinds of feelings that arise. So in a sense, that, like I said, I mean, we will encounter, this just seems to be like death's a fact of life, as it were. Other people that we find difficult are a fact of life too. We will encounter people in our lives that we'll find difficult. That just seems to be a fact of life. So part of what we're doing with Metta Bhavana is acknowledging that that's just a fact, that's just a reality, and realizing that we don't have to necessarily create aversion out of those difficulties when they happen. And that's a really hard practice, but it is possible, and it makes all the difference in terms of the way that our life goes, if we're able to experience unpleasant feeling without turning it into an emotion of hatred or aversion or ill will or resentment and so on. It's a big one. It's a really big one. But that is what we're trying to do in Metta Bhavana. So how does that translate into the actual practice of metta? What does that actually mean in terms of the fourth stage in particular? So what it means is that when we bring to mind a difficult person, we will probably experience unpleasant feeling tone. That's probably what's going to happen. We'll find it uncomfortable. So there's nothing wrong with that. In a way, it's to be expected. So you might, somebody mentioned tension earlier. You might notice it as your body kind of clenching. You kind of recoil from that person when they arise. you might notice that you start getting into an argument with them. Often what happens with me is I go into the fourth person stage, and then I just start getting into a kind of an argument with the person, basically. And then a moment later, or sometimes I must confess, a few moments later, I realize that I'm doing that, and I kind of come to my senses a bit. And then I can remember, no, there's just something painful here. I don't have to get into a whole lot of thoughts about it. I can just experience it as painful. So the first thing that we're trying to do, really, in the fourth stage, in the difficult person stage, is just experience the unpleasant Vedana, the unpleasant feeling tone, as just that. It's just acknowledging this is unpleasant. Maybe this is even painful. It's just yuck, and weirdly, if we can do that, it changes it. It's just, this is just part of life. It's not something that is an aberration. It's just part of the fabric of life. And then we stop resisting it, and it actually becomes less painful then. We can just acknowledge, we can just accept that, this is just painful, without getting just stressed about it, without wishing it wasn't there. We just acknowledge it. And this is the really crucial thing, we hold that unpleasant feeling together with that imaginative identification of the other person. So it's as if we're like, yeah, this is painful, and that person also has feelings. Because often what we do is we think of that person as producing that horrible feeling in us. We think of that person, that difficult person, as producing the resentment. So we only associate them with something nasty and unpleasant. And so we take it personally, even if it's not meant personally. Sometimes things are meant personally, but we take it personally, and we associate that person only with that unpleasantness. So that's what we're trying to get out of the habit of doing, and just to be with that unpleasant feeling and holding that with an awareness of the other person. And if we do that, if we genuinely do that, if we're genuinely aware that the other person, is a person that experiences joy and experiences suffering, then it won't be possible for us to generate aversion towards them. We'll just stay with that, the painfulness of it. And that's going to be a transformative thing in the way that we relate to our life, because we will encounter difficulty. There's no doubt about it. And if every time we encounter difficulty, we produce hatred, we won't be a happy person. But if every time we encounter difficulty, we're able to just be with that difficulty, then we'll be much happier, more creative, and actually we'll have much more confidence in our life. So one point, we'll do a bit of practice in a moment, but I just wanted to make one last point, and that is that having metta for someone that we find difficult doesn't mean that we're necessarily accepting their behavior. So they might be doing something which they shouldn't be doing, which is damaging for them and for others, and maybe for us. So it doesn't mean we're saying that's okay. We don't have to do that. We don't have to say that's fine that you do that. But so it's not that we're trying to be a kind of doormat and letting somebody just walk all over us and wipe their dirty boots on us. But what we're trying to do is recognize that we might think that what they're doing is they shouldn't be doing, but we're not going to hate them for it. There's so much indignation in the world. I don't know if there's more than there used to be, but a lot of it is not very helpful. It's just hating other people for doing things that we don't think they should be doing. Now, clearly, people are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, but hating people for it is not necessary. You can have a really clear sense of what's a good way of being a human being and what's not a good way of being a human being without hating the people who you think are getting it wrong. And I think that's really super important, that we make that distinction. So I just wanted to say that, because I think often people pick up the Metta Bhavana in such a way that it sounds like you're just being a kind of a nice person in a kind of insipid, kind of lame, kind of meek kind of way. And it's not like that at all. It's much more about reclaiming and owning your sense of agency and saying, I'm not going to have my inner experience determined by somebody else's behavior. I'm not going to be that enslaved to circumstance. I'm going to develop freedom from circumstance. And that's really what Buddhism is about. That's particularly what Metta Bhavana is about, is developing that kind of freedom. So difficult things can happen, and that doesn't determine our mental state, our inner world, and it doesn't determine the way that we behave. Anyway, so let's actually do some practice. There's probably loads of questions coming out of that, but let's just actually do some practice. We might not get onto all the stages, but we will just do the fourth stage at least. But we'll start with the first stage, and then maybe what we'll do is the first stage, the second stage, and then the fourth stage, and see how we get on. So again, just coming back to what's going on and letting go of what's being talked about, and try and connect with your immediate experience, particularly to begin with, of your body. Being particularly sensitive to tension. If you bring awareness to tension, it tends to soften. So bringing awareness to the eyes and the forehead, allowing them soften. Bringing awareness to the jaw. The scalp. The neck and the shoulders. Particularly the shoulders. Allowing the arms and the shoulders to be heavy as you allow the chest to open. And just let the breath come in and out evenly, smoothly, naturally. Particularly letting the abdomen soften, your belly. And softening in the legs, the upper legs and the lower legs. So you're soaking the whole of your body with awareness, a kindly, curious awareness. And particularly being aware of the area around the heart. So maybe there's a sense of metta there already, metta for self. And just by giving our attention to it, we can allow it to deepen. Maybe we might like to evoke metta for ourselves in one of the ways that we've looked at in the last week or so. I'll just leave it to you to enter into the first stage in a way that is meaningful and appropriate to you. And then metta for a friend. So bringing your friend to mind and notice how that feels. And being open to what actually happens. So really feel what it's like to, as it were, be with your friend. Feel it. It might not feel like much, and that's okay. But whatever evokes an awareness that your friend is real, that they exist from their side, that's the important thing in terms of developing metta. So again, proceeding with the good friend stage and whatever way feels appropriate, making sure you decide what you're going to do. And then letting your friend just move into the background and just checking that your body is relaxed, checking that your face is relaxed, the forehead and the eyes particularly, the jaw is relaxed, the shoulders, the belly. And if you're a bit tense, you might just concentrate on your exhalation and just letting the exhalation and the release that happens with the exhalation soften and release the tension in the body. And then bring to mind someone that you find difficult. And notice how that feels. If you find yourself getting tense, seeing if you can just soften around that tension. And just acknowledging that there could well be, there likely will be pain. It might be associated with a past event. But just acknowledging the fact of it. It might be recent pain. It might be a long-standing grievance or antagonism. And as it were, holding that pain with an awareness that that person exists from their side. There's a whole life there that's not just our pain. That person experiences pain themselves, and they experience joy themselves. So including them in that attitude of metta, you can use one of the phrases if you want to, or you can just stay with that sense of holding that difficulty together with an awareness of that person as being real. Don't push or force. Your experience is real. Their experience is real. And then also bring into mind your friend and yourself. Each person real. Each person equally desirous of their own well-being, of their own growth. And then just sitting. So tonight we're just going to do the first, second, and fourth stages. So just sitting. So, if you'd like to bring the meditation to a close, so I just wanted to just summarize what we did this evening, and just give you a moment to decide what approach you're going to take this week to the practice. So basically, there's 4 different things. So earlier on this evening, we looked at 2 approaches to the first stage of the Metta Bhavana. So the first one was approach with awareness of the potential for growth that each and every being possesses. Yeah, so we're starting with ourself there. The second approach was to approach with the awareness of the intrinsically pure nature of each and every being, like a diamond. So what I suggest you do is just take one of those approaches. If you find that neither of them had much, you didn't kind of quite get it, or it doesn't work for you, but you've got some other way of practicing in the first stage that does work for you, just forget about it. Don't worry about it. I really mean that. It's just a matter of, I'm just throwing a whole lot of things out there, and some of it will work for you and some of it won't. And if it doesn't, just don't worry about it, really. Just let it go. It might come back later on as something that's just helpful, but don't worry about it. You can't do all of it. Just make sure you've got one particular approach that you feel like you want to proceed with. And then the third thing is in stage 4 is to hold the unpleasant feeling tone with an imaginative identification with a difficult person. Yeah, so you're just holding that sense of like, ouch, or whatever, with an awareness of the person as existing, as kind of independent of that feeling. You know, that they're a human being. And the fourth thing, in a way, is just to mop up any other learning. So to incorporate any of the learning from the previous week of practice. Yeah. So anything that you learned over the last, during the course of the evening, or from the discussion group, or from your practice during the week, that you'd like to kind of incorporate into your practice. So because often things come up which aren't kind of on the curriculum, as it were, but are actually really helpful. So just give you a moment just to think about what you want to take into this week of practice. Ideally, it's just 1 or maybe 2 things that you want to bring into your week of practice, and don't worry about doing all 4 at all. You probably won't be able to, actually. So I'll just leave a minute just for you to reflect. Okay, so so someone's just asking about the poem. I'll put the poem in the notes, which I will send you this week, I promise. Next week, we're going to look at the neutral person stage, which actually is one of the most difficult parts of this practice. Some of you might have found that already. So we'll look at the neutral person stage. And just to remind you that we're doing everything at the moment on a donation basis. So part of the reason I do these courses is because I just think that if more people did the Metta Bhavana, the world that we live in would be completely different. It'd be way better. If you can imagine, if like 10% of the people who live in this country did the Metta Bhavana every day, it would be a completely different country. So that's part of the reason that we do these courses. So if you want to help us to do that, then please give us a donation, and we'll do what we can to keep that happening. If you've got any more questions, do hang on afterwards. I know I didn't get to all the questions that came up, and I'll see you next week. So that's the end.